on for our GNS Entrepreneurial Lecture Series, and this is third in the series of such lectures. And our topic for today is characteristics of an entrepreneur or characteristics of the entrepreneur. Before going to explain these basic characteristics that an entrepreneur possesses, I will first want us to know who is an entrepreneur or what really is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, as we are told in our ordinary level days, is the person who organizes. An entrepreneur is somebody who organizes other resources for productive use. Land, labor, and capital are put into effective use by somebody who is called an entrepreneur. So such a person is saddled with the responsibility of mixing and blending all these resources in various proportions to give rise to a given output. So the way it is saying at that level is that entrepreneurship is all about organizing and assembling resources or inputs to bring forth a given output. And these resources, in real terms, can be mixed or blended in varying proportions to give rise to varying outputs as well. And that is to say that an entrepreneur can mix, say, about 10% of land blended with about 8% of labor and some quantum, say about 7% of capital in form of equipment and machineries to give rise to a given output. The same entrepreneur can still reblend these same inputs to now use about 20% of land, some 15% of labor, and some 12 or 11% of capital items to still give rise to another level of output. And that is why the entrepreneur is seen as an organizer, is seen as a manager of resources to give rise to a given output. Having said all that, nowadays, entrepreneurship goes beyond just assembling resources, putting together inputs to give rise to a given output. In real terms, or in the actual sense, entrepreneurship now is a process. And when we say a process, we are talking of something that goes through several stages. It is not a one-stop thing. Entrepreneurship is a process of several activities involving several stages. One stage, then thereafter another. Then, having said that, there are several definitions or several meanings that have been ascribed to the concept of entrepreneurship. In fact, one can say that there are meanings and definitions of entrepreneurship as there are authors or as there are textbooks. In the ordinary sense, the way it is seen by an economist is that an entrepreneur, just as I've explained, is an assembler or an organizer of various inputs to give rise to an output. But another person has defined it as a process or a dynamic process created and managed by individuals, meaning that entrepreneurship is something that is ongoing. It's not a static thing, it's a dynamic process. It keeps evolving, it keeps changing. Even as we speak, the entrepreneurial process keeps evolving. Another authority explains it as a process of creating value, a process of creating value or a process of creating something new with value. by deploying several resources in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of psychic and other resources, and thereafter getting independence and financial freedom. And that definition was given by a person called Robert Eastrich in the year 2002. And his own explanation of entrepreneurship is that entrepreneurship is really a process of creating something new, not just creating a product or a service or a commodity, but really a process of adding value to an existing thing. And that is why it defines it as a process of creating something new with value. So there must be a value addition. But that value addition is not just obtained without the entrepreneur putting several resources into that process. And these resources, of course, includes time, his own energy, money, and several other resources to equally include psychic resources, his thinking ability, all embedded in that process of trying to create something new. And that, of course, means that in the entrepreneurial process, the entrepreneur adds value to an existing thing. And it is thereafter he now gains financial freedom and independence. And that means that having been able to come up with a creativity, having been able to innovate, having been able to make a discovery, the entrepreneur now sits back and he now gets a financial reward. He equally gets independence. He now becomes an employer of labor. He's now a job creator. Then he's able to gain independence. He doesn't have to look for any job. He becomes an employer of labor. He employs other people to help him in his entrepreneurial process. So with that, one can now summarize what really is entrepreneurship all about. Entrepreneurship is about five major things. And the first is ideation. Entrepreneurship involves ideation, coming up with new ideas. Anything that one does that you can come up with new ideas, new ways of doing things, then you are an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship also is about innovation. An entrepreneur is somebody who innovates, coming up with new, something that had not been in existence before. So if anybody is engaged in any activity and you are innovating in that process, then you are equally an entrepreneur. The third one is that entrepreneurship deals with creativity. Creativity involves trying to come up with a new way of doing things. If you are doing that also, you are an entrepreneur. If you are creative, the creative process is the entrepreneurial process. So creativity is another way of explaining what entrepreneurship itself also means. Then also is the fourth one, and that is discovery. The discovery process is also the entrepreneurial process. If anybody has been able to make a discovery, something that is entirely new, something just evolving, something that had not been in existence before, then you can be ascribed to be an entrepreneur in all its entirety and in all its ramifications. So a discoverer is an entrepreneur, a creator is an entrepreneur, an innovator is an entrepreneur, somebody that comes up with a new idea is an entrepreneur. Then also the fifth one is if one is able to invent. An inventor is an entrepreneur. The inventive process as well involves a lot of steps and stages. So an inventor is also an entrepreneur. So having said that and having explained the five major pillars upon which entrepreneurship as a concept, entrepreneurship as a vocation, entrepreneurship as a way of life really stands on, which of course again is ideation, innovation, invention, creativity, and discovery. Anybody who's explaining entrepreneurship must, of course, explain it to revolve around these five basic concepts of ideation, of innovation, of creativity, of invention, and discovery. So having known that, we now move into discussing the characteristics of the entrepreneur. And when we say the characteristics, we are actually talking about the attributes of an entrepreneur. And by attribute also is meant the traits of the entrepreneur. We can as well call it the qualities of the entrepreneur. So whichever of those synonyms that one picks, we are still talking about the characteristics of the entrepreneur. So these characteristics, I'm going to approach it via two different perspectives or two different approaches. And the first one is called the trait approach to explaining the characteristics of the entrepreneur. And the second one is the innovative stroke organizer approach. Innovative slash organizer approach to explaining or to discussing the characteristics of the entrepreneur. So starting with the first one. The first one, of course, as I said, is the trait approach. And this trait approach sees the entrepreneur as somebody who possesses certain qualities, as somebody who possesses certain innate attributes which non-entrepreneurs do not possess. What do we mean by possessing certain attributes or certain traits or certain features or certain characteristics which non-entrepreneurs do not possess? That means that the entrepreneurs are special people. They are special beings. Entrepreneurs are special creatures that are born with certain innate traits and characteristics that the ordinary person may not possess. So that, of course, also goes with a theory in leadership called the genetic theory of leadership. And that also explains the fact that that theory portends that leaders are born and not made. The genetic theory of leadership says that leaders are born, leaders are God created, leaders are God given, that leaders are not made, but that leaders are born. But that theory again is contented or is negated by several other theories of leadership, like the followership theory that says that people are the ones that will elect or appoint their own leaders. That is what the followership theory says. But I'm just trying to provide a synergy between the genetic theory of leadership and the trait approach to explaining the characteristics of an entrepreneur. And that genetic theory, just as I've explained, says that leaders are born and not made. That leaders, right from the time they are in their mother's womb, God has deposited certain innate characteristics, certain innate entrepreneurial qualities in them. The thing just manifests as they continue to grow into adulthood. In the same way, the trait approach to explaining the characteristics of the entrepreneur portends that entrepreneurs are born and not made. That the entrepreneurship qualities are not something that can be learned, but rather they are God given, that God has deposited it in the being or in every human being who are entrepreneurs. And that is why that theory explains that entrepreneurs are born and not made. That entrepreneurs possess certain innate qualities and characteristics that non-entrepreneurs do not possess. So having said that, what are these qualities under the trait approach? I will go step by step and one after the other. There are basically 6 of these qualities that the trait approach outlines. And the first one is self-confidence. Self-confidence. And this, of course, says that the entrepreneur, anywhere you find them, they are people who have self-confidence. They are people who are self-confident. Entrepreneurs have self-confidence. They are people who on their own are not afraid to take positions. Entrepreneurs are not people who are not confident. Anything they set out to do, they move all machineries towards achieving such things. Entrepreneurs are not people who are not ready to take the bull by the horn. Anywhere you find them, they lead, others will follow. They are always self-confident individuals. So this is one of the qualities or traits that the trait approach brings out, that anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur is always self-confident. They are not people who are timid, they are not afraid, but in life there are some people who are timid. But entrepreneurs are not timid. And that is why the trait approach believes that such a quality of being self-confident is not it's not something that can be learned. It's not something that can be acquired, but rather it is something that is God-given, that it is God himself who deposits it in every human being right from the time they are like a fetus in their mother's womb. Number 2 is that entrepreneurs are task and result oriented. And when we say entrepreneurs are task and result oriented, what we mean there is that an entrepreneur will not just move out without setting goals to be achieved either on daily basis or either on weekly basis or perhaps on fortnightly or on monthly basis. So entrepreneurs are task oriented. Entrepreneurs are people who are task and result oriented. Before they embark on any activity, they will have defined the task step by step to be achieved. Such tasks are not just set, they equally map out strategies and alternatives with a view to achieving such tasks that they have set for themselves. The entrepreneur is somebody who is result oriented. Before putting up a task, they have defined the result to be achieved. Some of us will just set goals or tasks without defining in clear terms how to achieve the set goals or how to achieve a result in the task that we have defined. So entrepreneurs are not people like that. Entrepreneurs are people who on their own will set tasks either daily or weekly or fortnightly or quarterly, and the tasks are set with the purpose of coming up with defined results or outputs. Number three, in that trade approach also, is that the entrepreneur is a risk taker. The entrepreneurs are risk takers. Entrepreneurs are people who take risk. Entrepreneurs are not risk averse people. Entrepreneurs are not risk averters. Entrepreneurs are ready to take several risks. Several risks, I mean both measurable as well as immeasurable risk. Equally, risk that are calculable as well as incalculable ones. Entrepreneurs are ready to delve into as many as possible of this risk. Entrepreneurs are equally ready to take risk that are somehow very incalculable. As I've said, risk that you cannot accurately measure, while equally assuming several measurable ones. So entrepreneurs are not risk averse. In fact, another name for the entrepreneur is to call them a risk taker. It will be extremely right if we say entrepreneurs are risk takers. We can take that phrase as a synonym to standing for an entrepreneur. Risk taking is the cornerstone, is the primary role that every entrepreneur must be ready to assume. The case of Dangote is a very good case in point around us. He dabbled, he took a risk into investing well over $22 billion into a refinery in Lekki. And today, that refinery has been completed and it has reached a stage of fruition. It's now reaping its own reward. So entrepreneurs are not people who are not ready to take risks. Dangote, before completing that refinery in Lekki, he has assumed several measurable as well as immeasurable risks. He has dabbled into calculable and risk that cannot be calculated as well. So an entrepreneur must be somebody who is ready to assume several dimensions of risk. And that is why under this straight approach to explaining the characteristics of the entrepreneur, the trade approach sees that function of risk taking as God given, that it cannot be possessed by anybody or by non-entrepreneurs, but people whom God has given the ability to be able to assume risk of innumerable dimensions. Number four is leadership. Under this trade approach, another basic quality is that an entrepreneur, anywhere they are leaders. Entrepreneurs are not followers. Entrepreneurs are people who will lead while others will always follow. By the time one becomes an innovator, by the time one is able to come up with an invention, by the time a person is able to make a discovery and you become an entrepreneur, whether your innovation or your invention is patented or not, or whether you decide to now go into exemplifying or practicalizing your innovative process by putting up a firm or an industry, trying to showcase the product or the outcome of your innovation or your invention. In all this, you are a leader. You have to explain even the process of your innovation or the process of your coming up with a discovery to others. Through that alone, you are a leader. You have to be a leader, a good communicator. And in that process, The entrepreneur is believed to be leading, while others are the ones that will, of course, follow. So if an entrepreneur again now doubles as a manager of an enterprise after coming up with an innovation, and he now decided to now exemplify the outcome of his innovation or his invention by setting up either a small scale industry or a small scale firm, then again he has to organize several resources. He puts together inputs in form of land, labor and capital. He blends them to come up with an output. In that process, he is performing the leadership quality. And that is why under this straight approach, entrepreneurs are again seen as leaders. Number 5 is originality. Another quality of the entrepreneur is that entrepreneurs are original in whatever they do. In whatever the entrepreneur does, the entrepreneur is believed to be an original person. Entrepreneurs are not copycats, although at times or seldomly they may have to emulate and add value to whatever they have emulated. But you can never see a true entrepreneur copying something verbatim. Entrepreneurs are original in whatever they lay their hands upon. Albeit, at times they may have to emulate what has been in existence somewhere, and they now extend this by adding value. And once there is a value addition, the entrepreneurial process is believed to have been completed. So entrepreneurs are original, and that is one of the basic qualities that the trade approach believes that an entrepreneur must, of course, possess. And the last one, which is the sixth quality under the trade approach, is that entrepreneurs are future oriented. Entrepreneurs are future oriented. And by this, we mean that entrepreneurs are not just goal setters. They are not just goal and result oriented, or they are not just task and result oriented, but they are equally future oriented in their perspectives. Entrepreneurs are future oriented in their thinking. Entrepreneurs are future oriented in their mindset. The entrepreneurial mindset is such that entrepreneurs are good dreamers. They are able to foretell what may likely happen in the next 1 minute. Entrepreneurs are good forecasters. They can forecast what will happen by 7 p.m. today based on what is happening now and what had happened in the past, say yesterday. With their experience and knowledge of what has transpired in the yester period and what is currently happening now, entrepreneurs can foretell what you will expect 8 p.m. today or even early morning tomorrow. So entrepreneurs are future oriented, and many of them are able to excel because of their future oriented quality, which of course is one of the basic traits under the trait approach to explaining or discussing the characteristics of the entrepreneur. So having said that, under the trait approach, the second approach is the one called the innovative or organizer approach. And this approach explains that the entrepreneur is an organizer. The entrepreneur is a manager of resources. The entrepreneur, as seen by Sean Peter, as seen by Joseph Alois Schumpeter, one of the greatest economists of this century, sees entrepreneurship as a process of organizing several resources or putting inputs together, blending them in varying proportion to bring forth varying outputs. So this second approach to explaining the characteristics of an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur is seen as an assembler of several inputs that is used in the production process, which in economics is called the factors of production. And these resources are land, labor, and capital. And the fourth factor is the entrepreneur himself. And that entrepreneur is called the organizer. So it is the organizer that will organize the several other factors of production for effective and efficient productive use. And it is in that process that the entrepreneur can blend these resources in several proportions. He can decide to combine 20% quantum of labor and mix it with about 10% quantum of land and just add about 5% quantum of capital items. And that definitely will result in a given output. No doubt, the entrepreneur again can decide to reblend by remixing these three different inputs in another proportion. You can now decide to use 20% quantum of land, 15% quantum of labor, and some 8% or some 9% quantum of capital items in form of either financial resources or equipment or even in form of machineries. And that definitely again will yield a given output. And that is why this second approach sees the entrepreneur as an organizer and a manager of several resources that creates capital formation, which of course leads to economic growth in the economy. And by doing this, the entrepreneur is believed to perform several managerial functions, which the ordinary manager performs. But for the fact that the entrepreneur can double, one as an innovator and also as an inventor or a discoverer, and as well as a manager of men and materials in an organization, is not enough to now conclude or to now say that every manager is an entrepreneur, or it's not enough to conclude that every entrepreneur will be a good manager. But an entrepreneur can be a manager may not be an entrepreneur. At this juncture, I would even like to distinguish between what is called entrepreneurship and what is called intrapreneurship. Because at times, people take this to mean the same thing, but in actual fact, they are different. In the same fold, entrepreneurship cannot be taken to mean business formation. The two concepts are clearly different as well. Entrepreneurship is not same or is not the same thing as business formation. And I want to go one after the other. What is entrepreneurship? That, of course, I've explained in detail in the process of this lecture. And I've said that entrepreneurship is best explained via 5 different concepts. And they are ideation, innovation, creativity, invention, and the 5th one is discovery. What then is intrapreneurship? INTRA, preneurship, intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship is similar to entrepreneurship, but it's not the same thing with entrepreneurship. An intrapreneur is someone who is engaged by an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur works in an organization for an entrepreneur, and he performs all the entrepreneurial functions of ideation, of innovation, invention, even discovery. The entrepreneur is also a leader, just like the entrepreneur. But the entrepreneur is distinguished from the entrepreneur because of one singular factor or reason, and that is that the entrepreneur is not the one that provides the venture capital. The venture capital that is used up in the innovative process, which also we can call the seed capital, is provided by the entrepreneur. So that is the only distinguishing trait or factor between an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. And let me give an example, a local example, a familiar example to draw home my analysis. Let's take the example around us. Dangote, the richest man in Africa, a great entrepreneur of our time, is an entrepreneur who has chains of industries. He has Dangote refinery, he has Dangote salt, he has Dangote cement, Dangote transport, and several other Dangote ancillaries. In each of these establishments, say Dangote cement or Dangote salt, there is a managing director. That managing director himself is an entrepreneur, is an intrapreneur. He takes all the entrepreneurial thoughts and thinking and functions on behalf of his principal, who is the main entrepreneur. But he's not the one that provided the seed capital to establish Dangote cement or the Dangote salt. Dangote himself still takes reports from all these various intrapreneurs who manages his several entities, the Dangote salt, the Dangote refinery, and he gives advices. He gives his own entrepreneurial advices. He gives them controls. He tells them what to do on critical situations, on daily or on routine basis. So what distinguishes the entrepreneur from the intrapreneur is the seed capital, which is provided by the entrepreneur. Because if there is a need to establish another plant of Dangote cement, the entrepreneur, the MD of Dangote cement, cannot take that decision alone because it involves a seed capital or a venture capital. And that, of course, the owner of the business, the entrepreneurial main person, who is Dangote himself, of course, must be put at the round table for discussion. Having explained that, now what is the difference between entrepreneurship and business formation? Because people still use or still mistake these two concepts and they use them interchangeably. But in actual fact, they are different. Entrepreneurship is about ideation, innovation, creativity. It's about discovery. But forming a business is not equal to the ability to innovate. It's not same with the ability to invent. It's not the same with the ability to make a discovery. So a manager can manage his business, but he may not be the entrepreneur. But the entrepreneur can decide to double as an innovator or an inventor, and at the same time a businessman or a manager of a business, if he decides to exemplify his innovation by putting up a small-scale enterprise to practicalize the process of his innovation. Then he becomes an entrepreneur and also a manager of an enterprise. And that now takes us to what are these roles that the entrepreneur again will perform if he doubles as an entrepreneur and a manager of an enterprise. He now performs the various managerial functions that the manager performs in every organization. And these functions or roles are: one, he now performs the function of planning. Planning is a major managerial function. So anybody who has doubled as a manager of an enterprise and as an innovator, he has to perform the function of planning. So he plans all his activities, he plans his production, he plans who to employ, he plans who to train, he plans who to send away, who to fire, he plans all the managerial activities. He's now a manager of men and materials. He's now a manager of men and machines. So the first function he performs in the organization is that of planning. Number two is organizing. As an organizer, I've explained in the course of this lecture that the entrepreneur ordinarily blends and organizes several inputs or factors of production in the productive process. In the same way, the manager, as a manager in an organization, must be ready to organize its resources. Organization of an enterprise deals with organizing resources in their right proportions and perspective. It deals with organizing human resources in a way that they will bring forth fruitful output. So the manager in an organization is somebody who must be ready to perform the organizing function in such enterprise. Number three is communicating. Any entrepreneur who has doubled as a manager in an enterprise must also be ready to be a good communicator. He must be able to communicate in clear and understandable terms. He must be able to communicate with people around him, his superiors, his subordinates, and his superordinates as well, in a language that they must understand. In an organization, if a manager will best communicate with his driver in his local language, say in Yoruba or in Igbo language or in his Hausa language or in a particular dialect that will make that driver to understand what the manager is communicating, it is better that such a manager uses such a local language or a local dialect rather than speaking English or speaking French or German to make him appear or look international. That may not achieve his desired goal and result for that purpose. Also, number four is that a good manager must be a good coordinator. So coordinating function is another important characteristics or another attribute that the entrepreneur who doubles as a manager must be ready to perform. And coordinating deals with ability of a manager to be able to coordinate or bring together, ability to bring together several resources in the organization, ability to bring together men and materials, personnel and machines to be able to achieve the desired goals and objectives of the organization. Then number 5 is leading. Leading is another major characteristics or another major function that a manager performs in an organization. So leadership is a particular characteristics that the entrepreneur who has doubled as one, an entrepreneur, and two, as a manager of his own business, must, of course, be ready to perform. He must lead while others must follow by having the ability to come up with an innovation, to come up with an invention, or even making a discovery. Then definitely the entrepreneur is already a leader in his own right. So putting up an entity, an enterprise, now again, in fact, doubles him as a leader and a manager of that organization. Another important characteristics or another important function that the entrepreneur performs as a manager is delegation. A good manager must have the ability to delegate. And the reason is not far-fetched. As a manager in an enterprise, it is not expected that you do all. Even at a point, a sole proprietor cannot do everything in his sole proprietorship business. He has to perhaps at times delegate and rely on the judgment of people around him. So ability to delegate will make the managerial function seamless and extremely simpler. Then that equally will allow the manager to achieve his desired goals and objectives timely. So delegation is one of the principal functions or characteristics that the entrepreneur must, of course, possess as a manager in an organization. And another important function which the entrepreneur also must perform is that of directing. Ability to direct human and non-human resources in an organization as an entrepreneur is very, very prime, is very, very important. And it is germane because human beings, being what we are very difficult to direct. They are very difficult to direct. Human beings, because of whom we are very difficult to direct, as well difficult to lead, as well difficult to manage. So good entrepreneurs who are managers and captains of industries must evolve a means of directing people as well as materials in the organization in a way to achieve his desired goals as well as his desired objectives. And lastly is controlling. Controlling is another important function or another important attribute that an entrepreneur must equally possess if he now doubles as an entrepreneur and as a manager of an enterprise. He must be ready to assume the responsibility of controlling men and machines in that organization. As I pointed out, people are difficult to lead, they are equally difficult to control. There are times when subordinates will even refuse instructions and orders, except in the military, where nobody looks at the eye of his superior. But in several organizations, we have seen cases where subordinates will even not go by the orders or instructions or controls of his superiors and managers. So a good manager must evolve his own way of making his subordinates to be amenable to his control. So on that note, we come to the end of our discussions on the characteristics of the entrepreneur. And I've discussed this topic today via two different approaches. I discussed it via the trait approach as well as the organizer approach. But before doing that, I explained in clear terms who an entrepreneur is, and as well I've been able to distinguish it from an intrapreneur. So on that note, we have come to the end of our discussions on the topic, the characteristics of the entrepreneur. So thank you for listening, and God bless.